Justice isn't always blind. Sometimes it's forged in titanium and delivered with the weight of an unbreakable resolve. Witness the calculated moves of those who refuse to let the truth be buried under layers of corruption. Subscribe today and watch as the scales of fate finally align.
The discharge papers came through on a Tuesday. 14 months in Kandahar, and they handed me a manila envelope and a handshake and told me I was free to go. I'd imagined the drive home 100 times on patrol. My daughter Sophie running out the front door before I even had the truck in park, my wife Claire standing in the doorway with that smile she had, the one that meant she'd been watching the driveway for an hour already. I'd imagined it so many times it felt like a memory, instead of something that hadn't happened yet. The house looked different when I pulled up. I don't mean structurally different. Same blue siding, same cracked concrete path, same oak tree my father-in-law had helped me plant the year Sophie was born. But there was something about the way the blinds were drawn at 2 in the afternoon. Claire never kept the blinds down during the day. She had a thing about natural light. I sat in the truck for a minute before going in. The key still worked. Inside, the house was clean in the way that made me uncomfortable. Surfaces cleared, nothing left out. Sophie's drawings used to cover the refrigerator. There were 6 magnets on it now, and nothing else. I checked her room first, the way you always check on the people you love before you check on anything else. Her bed was made tight. Her stuffed rabbit, the brown one she'd named Mr. Hops and refused to sleep without since she was 3, was gone. My phone buzzed. "Claire, you're home early," she said. No hello. No warmth. 2 weeks early. Medical release. Shoulder. I flexed it without thinking, felt the pull of the surgery scar. "Where's Sophie?" Silence. 3 seconds of it. I've been in enough tense situations to know that 3 seconds of silence from someone who loves you is never good. "She's at Horizon Springs." Claire's voice shifted into something rehearsed. "It's a therapeutic wellness retreat for kids with emotional regulation issues. Dr. treats and relation issues. Harmon recommended it. I didn't know who Dr. Harmon was. I didn't know Sophie had emotional regulation issues. 6 months ago, when the satellite connection had been good enough for a video call, my daughter had shown me a drawing she'd done of our house with a rainbow over it and told me she was saving the picture for when I got home. "What address?" "Marcus. It's a structured program. You can't just, Claire, what address?" She gave it to me like she was reading from a script she'd prepared. "Route 9, outside a town called Millhaven, 2 hours north." Then she said, "They don't allow unannounced visits. It disrupts the therapeutic process. I'll announce myself when I get there." I was already moving. The drive north took me through farmland that flattened out the further I went, the kind of landscape that feels indifferent to human problems. The GPS signal dropped twice on Route 9. When I found the turnoff, it was unmarked. Just a wooden post with a reflector on it and a gravel road that disappeared into tree cover. Horizon Springs looked like it had started life as a summer camp, main lodge, wooden cabins arranged in a loose semicircle, a meadow that sloped down toward a creek. The parking area had 4 vehicles in it, 2 trucks and a minivan, and a late model sedan. No sign of children anywhere. I parked and walked to the main lodge. Locked. I tried what looked like an office door around the side. Also locked. That's when I heard it. Sound carrying across the meadow. Voices. Young voices. I followed the sound past the cabins, past a garden with raised beds, past a woodpile that was stacked high enough to last years, not a summer. The meadow sloped down, and at the bottom, near the creek, children were working. 12, maybe 15 of them. Ages somewhere between 8 and 14. They were clearing brush, pulling up roots, hauling branches, stacking debris along the creek bank. It was 90 degrees and the creek offered no shade. They wore long pants and work gloves, and their heads were bare. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat stood at the edge of the work area with a clipboard. She wasn't working. She was watching. I found Sophie in the group closest to the water. I knew her before she turned around, the same way you always know your own child. Something in the angle of the shoulders, the specific way she tilted her head when she was concentrating on something difficult. She was small for 11, always had been, and she looked smaller now. Her hair was pulled back into a loose braid that was coming undone. Her arms, below the rolled-up sleeves, were covered in scratches from the brush. I was across the meadow before I'd made a conscious decision to move. Sir. The woman with a clipboard stepped toward me. This is a therapeutic session. Family visits are scheduled on the first Sunday of each month. That's my daughter. She moved to intercept me, and I went around her. Sophie had turned at the sound of my voice. Her face went through three things in about half a second: recognition, disbelief, and then something that broke me. Relief so overwhelming she started shaking before I even reached her. Daddy. Just that. Then her knees went and I caught her. She held onto my neck so hard it hurt. I could feel how thin she was. Her collarbone where my hand was pressed felt sharp in a way it hadn't before I left. Daddy, I didn't think you were coming. Her voice was muffled against my shoulder. They said you knew about this place. They said you signed the papers. They said this was what you wanted from me. Baby, no. They said I had anger problems and you needed me to get fixed before you came home because you didn't want to deal with me the way I was. Something cold moved through me. I held her tighter. The other children had stopped working. They were watching us. A girl with a red braid, maybe 9 years old, was crying silently. A boy who couldn't have been more than 8 was standing very still with an expression on his face that no 8-year-old should have. The expression of someone who has learned not to hope for things. How long have you been here? I asked Sophie. Since April. She pulled back enough to look at me. Her lips were chapped raw. Daddy, that's 3 months. I had left in May of the previous year. I had missed the 3 months that led up to this. I had missed whatever had shifted in my house that I should have seen coming. The woman with the clipboard was on a radio now. I heard her say there was a situation and to send someone down to the meadow. What is this place? I asked her, holding Sophie against my side. Horizon Springs is a licensed therapeutic residential program, she said. We work with children who have behavioral and emotional challenges. The work component is part of the therapeutic model. Physical labor builds character and self-regulation. I looked at the children by the creek. I looked at the woodpile I passed on the way down. I looked at the size of the garden beds. Then I looked at my daughter's hands inside the work gloves. I'd pulled one off to hold her hand, and there were blisters on 3 of her fingers that had opened and healed over and opened again. Who runs this program? Dr. Harmon is the clinical director. I can take you to his office and we can have a proper intake conversation. Take me to wherever these kids sleep. Right now. Her expression shifted. That's not something I can authorize without. Then go get someone who can authorize it. 2 men were coming across the meadow toward us. One was in his 40s, khakis, and a collared shirt with the Horizon Springs logo on the breast pocket. The other was younger and bigger, and I recognized the body language. He wasn't staff, he was muscle. The one in the collared shirt extended his hand when he reached me. Mr. Kellner, I'm glad you made it up here. We've been expecting a visit at some point. Dr. Turn. Harmon. That's right. His handshake was practiced, confident. The kind of handshake designed to communicate authority. Sophie has made real progress here. I know it's hard for a parent to hear that a child needs this kind of structured environment, but the work we do, show me where she sleeps. I understand you want to feel connected to Sophie's experience. That's natural. But our approach depends on consistent boundaries. When parents arrive unannounced and disrupt the therapeutic process, it sets the children back significantly. Sophie had her face pressed against my arm. She wasn't looking at Dr. Harmon at all. Children learn who is safe and who isn't, before they can explain why. I trusted her instincts more than his handshake. My wife signed some kind of agreement with you, I said. A standard therapeutic placement agreement, yes. Sophie was enrolled in our 12-month residential program. She has 9 months remaining. I didn't sign anything. Your wife holds power of attorney for family decisions during your deployment. The agreement is legally valid. He smiled. It was calibrated. Sympathetic but immovable. I have the paperwork in my office. I'd be happy to go through it with you in a calm, constructive setting. I called Claire right there in the meadow with Dr. Harmon watching. She answered on the second ring. Marcus, you enrolled our daughter in a year-long labor program and told her I wanted her there. It's not a labor program. Dr. Harmon's approach is research-based. Sophie was having such a hard time. She was failing 2 classes. She had that incident at school. And you were gone. And I didn't know what to do, and my sister's kids went through something similar at a program in Colorado, and it helped them. And Dr. Harmon came highly recommended. She has blisters on her hands, Claire. A pause. The physical component is therapeutic. Dr. Harmon explained. She weighs less than she did when I left. Longer pause. She told me you said I didn't want to deal with her the way she was, that she needed her fixed before I came home. Marcus, that's not... I didn't say it like that. Dr. Harmon recommended that framing to help Sophie understand the importance of the program, to motivate her. I hung up. Dr. Harmon had been watching me with the expression of a man who had handled this kind of conversation before. I understand this feels alarming, he said. It's common for parents, especially parents returning from deployment who are experiencing their own adjustment challenges, to react strongly. But Sophie's behavior before she came here was significant. The clinical team's assessment, I'm leaving with my daughter. He shook his head slowly. I'm afraid that's not possible. The placement agreement grants Horizon Springs temporary guardianship for the duration of the program. If you attempt to remove Sophie without completing the proper discharge process, you'll be in violation of a legal contract and potentially facing a custodial interference charge. Sophie's hand tightened around mine. Can you take me home? She said quietly. I'm working on it, I told her. My phone had 2 bars of signal. I used one of them to call my brother-in-law Terrence, who was a family attorney in Columbus. He picked up on the 3rd ring, and I gave him the short version. He was quiet for a moment, then said, How many kids are there? 12, 15, maybe more. And they're all working like this? Yes. Is there any visible injury beyond the blisters and scratches? I looked at Sophie. Malnutrition. She's lost significant weight. Okay, call 911. Do it now while I look up what licensing Horizon Springs actually has. Because here's the thing. A legitimate therapeutic residential program for minors cannot transfer guardianship in a placement agreement. That's not how it works. That's not a thing. Whatever they told Claire she was signing, she wasn't signing that. I called 911, and then I stood in that meadow with my daughter, and I didn't let go of her hand. The first deputy arrived in 11 minutes. She was maybe 30, with the wary efficiency of someone who'd been dispatched to situations that looked one way and turned out another. She took in the scene, me, Sophie, Dr. Harmon, the children by the creek, and her expression did something careful and quiet. Sir, I need you to step back from the child. She's my daughter. I'm Sergeant Marcus Cowner, U.S. Army, just returned from deployment. This is Sophie Cowner, 11 years old, enrolled in this program without my knowledge or consent. She looked at Sophie. Honey, is this your dad? Sophie nodded. She'd stopped crying. She was holding herself together with a kind of stillness that was itself a sign of something wrong. 11-year-olds shouldn't know how to hold themselves that still. Dr. Shrewd. Harmon stepped forward and presented a folder he produced from somewhere. Deputy, I have the legal documentation. This child is in our care under a valid therapeutic placement agreement. This man is attempting to remove her without authorization. The deputy took the folder. She read for a moment. Then she looked up at the children near the creek, who had not gone back to work. They were just standing there watching. The way you watch something you're afraid to hope is happening. How long has this work been going on today? She asked. The morning session began at 7, the woman with the clipboard said. It was past 1 in the afternoon. The deputy handed the folder back to Dr. Harmon. I'm going to need to see the full facility. All of it. I'd be happy to arrange a tour during business. Right now. All of it. She was already on her radio calling for backup. What happened over the next 5 hours, I'll never fully be able to put in order. A second cruiser. A state welfare investigator. A woman from the county licensing office who arrived and started asking questions about the program's certifications and got increasingly quiet as Dr. Harmon answered them. Terrence drove up from Columbus with a colleague who specialized in family law. They found 17 children total, housed in a cabin meant to sleep 8. They found a punishment room, a supply closet with a bolt on the outside, that 3 different children mentioned independently when asked if there was anywhere they went when they were in trouble. They found financial records showing that Horizon Springs had contracts with 3 private landowners in the county to provide youth labor development services, meaning the children's work was being sold. Sophie sat with me in my truck while it happened. She drank 2 bottles of water and ate the gas station crackers I found in my bag. And after about an hour, when the shock had worn down a little, she started talking. She told me about the schedule. Up at 5:30. Breakfast was instant oatmeal, same every morning. Work from 7 to noon. Lunch was a sandwich and a piece of fruit. More work in the afternoon. Dinner was early, 5 o'clock, and then what they called reflection sessions, which were Dr. Harmon talking about gratitude and discipline and how their parents had sent them here because they needed to become better people. He said you specifically asked him to make sure I understood that I wasn't easy to love when I was difficult, Sophie said. She was looking at the windshield, not at me. He said it was important for me to understand that love is conditional and I had to earn my way back to you. I had to take a minute before I could answer that. None of that is true, I said. None of it. You have never in your life been anything other than easy to love, not for one single day. She nodded slowly. I could see her processing it, trying to line it up against 3 months of being told otherwise. There's a girl here named Anna, she said. She's been here for 7 months. Her parents are both working overseas. She thinks they know about the program and just don't want her back. Do you know Anna's last name? Sophie thought. Whitmore, I think. Anna Whitmore. I wrote it down. Dr. Harmon was arrested at 4:17 in the afternoon. He maintained his composure right up until the handcuffs and then, in a way that reminded me of something I'd seen overseas more than once, the composure cracked completely, and what was underneath was not what the surface had suggested. He was shouting about his credentials, his research, the therapeutic validity of his approach, the ignorance of the system that had failed these children before they arrived at his program. I didn't feel satisfaction watching it. I just felt tired. Claire arrived as it was getting dark. She'd driven up after I'd hung up on her, which I understood meant something about where she was at, even if it wasn't enough and couldn't be enough. She stood outside the truck for a moment before Sophie saw her. When Sophie did see her, she looked at her mother and then looked at me and didn't move. You don't have to do anything right now, I told her. You don't know anyone anything right now. She eventually got out of the truck and let Claire hold her, and Claire was crying in the way you cry when you've done something you can't undo and you know it. I watched from a distance. I didn't feel sorry for Claire the way I once might have, but I also understood that she had been taken in by something designed to be taken in by. Dr. Harmon had answers for every question. He had documentation. He had the clinical language and the research citations and the calm certainty that marked someone as an authority figure. That was the thing that kept coming back to me in the weeks afterward. Horizon Springs looked legitimate. It had a website. It had brochures with testimonials. It had a licensed clinical director with framed degrees on his wall. Claire had asked questions and been given answers. She hadn't asked the right questions, the ones that couldn't be answered smoothly. But she'd been looking for someone to help her, and she'd found someone who knew exactly how to look like help. The investigation took 8 months. I'd resigned my commission by then. I had a job at a veterans support organization, and Sophie was in actual therapy with an actual therapist who had actual licensing, and an office with a window and a bowl of those soft mints on the reception desk that Sophie started looking forward to. The healing wasn't clean. She had nightmares. She had a period of about 6 weeks where she refused to eat breakfast, and her therapist said it was connected to the oatmeal, and we switched to whatever she asked for in the morning without comment. Eggs, cereal, sometimes leftover pizza, whatever she wanted. She had control of that one thing, and that mattered. She stopped talking about Anna Whitmore after a few weeks. I didn't stop. I gave her name to the investigator and then to the family law attorney, and eventually found that Anna's parents had been notified after the raid and had flown back from Singapore within 48 hours. That helped. Dr. Talp Harmon was convicted on 12 counts, including labor trafficking of minors, child endangerment, and wire fraud. He got 38 years. 4 staff members received sentences between 8 and 20 years. Claire avoided prosecution. The investigators determined she had been deceived about the nature of the program, that the paperwork she'd signed had been presented to her as a standard therapeutic enrollment form, and she hadn't known the guardianship clause existed. She and I separated 6 months after the trial. It was the right decision, and we both knew it, and it was still hard. What the prosecutor's office told me after the sentencing was that Horizon Springs was one of 7 similar operations they'd identified in the state, programs presenting themselves as therapeutic, wellness-oriented, or character-building, charging families significant fees while using the children as a labor source. The children whose parents were least likely to visit, whose families were in crisis, distracted, willing to trust an authority figure because they needed relief from a situation they couldn't manage alone. Sophie's therapist asked her, about a year into their work together, what she wanted people to know about what had happened to her. My daughter thought about it for a session and then wrote something down and read it at a school event the following month. She was 12 by then, stood at the podium with her notes in her hand and her voice steady. She said, if someone tells you that the people who love you sent you away because you were too hard to love, that is not information. That is a weapon. A real program. A real therapist. A real place that wants to help you will never need to take away your belief that you are loved. That is the test. That is the only test that matters. There were adults in that audience who cried. I was one of them. 2 years after Millhaven, we took a drive up Route 9 on a Saturday in October, Sophie and I. I don't know exactly why. It was her idea. She said she wanted to see it without it having power over her. The facility had been shut down and the property sold. The main lodge had been partially demolished. The meadow where the children had worked was overgrown, goldenrod and wild aster taking back the ground, the creek glinting behind them in the afternoon light. It didn't look like what it had been. It looked like a field trying to become something else. Sophie took a picture with her phone. For what? I asked. Art class, she said. I'm doing a project about places that look one way and are another way. She looked at the overgrown meadow for another minute. I think I'm going to paint it with the wildflowers bigger, like they're covering something up, but also like they're winning. On the drive back, she fell asleep against the window. I kept both hands on the wheel and drove the 2 hours home in the particular quiet that comes after things have been survived. What I know is this. The programs that will hurt your children will look, from the outside, like programs that will help them. They will use the language of care. They will have answers for your concerns. They will tell you that your hesitation is exactly the kind of unhealthy dynamic that made your child need them in the first place. They will make you feel that walking away is the brave thing, the loving thing, the thing a good parent does. Ask to visit unannounced. Ask where the children sleep and what they eat and what happens when they break a rule. Ask why the program needs legal guardianship in order to help your child. Ask those questions and watch what happens to the composure of the person across from you. The place that has nothing to hide will welcome the question. The place that doesn't will tell you the question itself is the problem. Sophie is 14 now and making honor roll, and has opinions about everything, and argues with me about her curfew, and I am grateful every single day for every single one of those arguments. She has a sketchbook she carries everywhere. She draws the way she always did, observing things carefully, finding what's underneath what's visible, putting it down on paper in a way that makes you see it differently. Last month, she showed me a drawing she'd done of the two of us, sitting at the kitchen table, her with her colored pencils spread out and me with my coffee and the morning paper. Just an ordinary Tuesday. Just us in our kitchen. She'd labeled it at the bottom in her careful handwriting. This is what safe looks like. I put it on the refrigerator. It's still there. I've thought a lot about the chain of decisions that put Sophie in that meadow, not just Dr. Harmon's decisions. Mine. I chose a second deployment when the first one ended. I told myself it was financial, the housing, the college fund, the things a father is supposed to provide, and those things were real. But if I'm honest, which I owe it to Sophie to be, there was also something easier about being somewhere where my role was clear. Overseas, I knew exactly what was asked of me. At home, after Sophie's mother left when Sophie was 6, I was less certain. I was doing my best, but my best had gaps in it, and I knew it, and I went offshore anyway and told myself the money would cover the gaps. That's not a moral failing unique to me. It's what people do when they're scared, and the fear is easier to outrun than to face, but the consequence of it was real. I left a grieving, struggling 11-year-old girl with a woman I hadn't known long enough, and I didn't ask the right questions before I left, and the space I created got filled by someone who knew exactly how to exploit it. Dr. Toon. Harmon didn't create the vulnerability, he found it. That's what people like him do. They look for the families that are stretched thin, the parents who are desperate for something to work, the children who have already been told in 100 small ways that they are difficult. He found Claire looking for a solution and gave her language that sounded like one. He found Sophie already half convinced that she was a burden, and he confirmed it, and then he put her to work. The intelligence it takes to run a place like Horizon Springs is real. I don't mean that as a compliment. I mean that understanding how trust works, how authority works, how a frightened parent will accept documentation and clinical language as proof of legitimacy. That requires a precise and practiced understanding of human weakness. Dr. Como. Harmon was smart in a way that a predator is smart. He knew where the soft places were. What I had to reckon with after the trial was that my own desire to believe Claire had handled things was a soft place too. I didn't ask enough questions because asking them would have meant admitting I didn't have enough confidence in the arrangement to leave without asking. The willingness to not know was its own kind of choice. Sophie paid for mine. She didn't pay with her life or her fundamental self. And I will be grateful for that for every remaining day of mine. She paid with 3 months of being told the story of herself was one of burden and difficulty and conditional love. That story takes time to undo. Her therapist told me it doesn't fully undo, it just gets rewritten over time. New evidence laid down on top of the old, until the old version loses its grip. I watched Sophie do that rewriting, slowly, with setbacks, with nightmares, with a period where she wouldn't eat breakfast, and a period where she was angry at me in ways she couldn't fully articulate, and I had to just sit with and not try to fix. The resilience wasn't the absence of struggle, it was the willingness to keep going through it. She had that, and I think she had it before Horizon Springs. And it is the thing they could not take from her, no matter how hard the system tried. What I know now, that I didn't know before, is that love is not enough on its own if it isn't accompanied by attention. I loved Sophie completely. I also wasn't paying enough attention. The two things coexisted, and the gap between them was where the harm entered. Attention is the active form of love. It's the one that requires you to be present and inconvenienced and sometimes uncertain and still there. I know that now in a way I didn't before, and I know it because my daughter is 14 and argues with me about her curfew, and I am here for every single one of those arguments, present and paying attention, which is the only thing I can offer her that actually matters.